It was the height of World War II, and Abrashe Szabrinski was a commander in the Partisans. These were a group of resistance fighters, fighting against the Nazis in occupied Poland. Abrashe Szabrinski had recently escaped the liquidation of the Vilna ghetto, where thousands of Jews were executed. He was a master of sabotage, and his speciality was blowing up Nazi train lines and disrupting transport lines.
Mr. Szabrinski, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us about your experiences inside the Vilna ghetto before you became a commander in the Partisans?
Inside the Vilna ghetto, thousands of people, the old and aged, were brought to Ponnery, where they were executed and thrown into a pit. Healthy men and women were sent to concentration camps, and very few people lived through this terrible period.
I can't even begin to imagine how despicable the action taken by the Nazis against the Jewish community was. But how did the Partisans respond to these atrocities?
The Partisans of the forest knew about all the terrible travails of the remaining Vilna Jews, and they were taking revenge by fighting a brave battle.
How did the Partisans sustain themselves while living in the forest?
It required a great deal of effort to live in the forest. Hundreds of people needed food and clothing. We obtained these necessities from the surrounding villages, even though many of them actually received ammunition from the Germans in order to fight the Partisans. These villages were in turn severely punished or liquidated by the Partisans.
The friendly peasants supported us with food and with ammunition. The unfriendly peasants had no choice. We would get in at night, pick up the prepared food orders that were prepared for the Germans, and leave receipts. The Partisans were here.
Cutting off the food supply chain to the German army served two purposes. Firstly, it provided the Partisans with a fresh flow of food, and secondly, it was depriving the Nazi war machine of their expected food supplies. One night, Szabrinski and his team crept through the woods towards a railway line that was critical to the Nazi war effort. The bridge was heavily guarded, but Szabrinski had a plan. He ordered his team to split into two groups, one to distract the guards, while the other planted explosions on the bridge. As the distraction team engaged the guards in a fierce firefight, Szabrinski's team raced onto the bridge and began planting the explosives. But just as they finished, the Nazis launched a counterattack, catching Szabrinski's team in a deadly crossfire. In the chaos, Szabrinski was wounded and separated from his team. He managed to escape by diving into the river below, but he knew that the mission had failed. As he swam to the riverbank, he heard the deafening sound of the explosives detonating in the distance. Days turned into weeks as Szabrinski went into hiding, nursing his wounds and plotting his revenge. He knew that the Nazis would be hunting him, but he was determined to strike back at them with everything he had. Szabrinski is wounded and lying low, and he knows that to gain the upper hand, he has to strike first. So it's not a question of if, but rather when. Finally, the opportunity presented itself. Szabrinski learned that the Nazis were transporting a critical shipment of weapons and supplies on a train that would pass through a remote valley. He assembled a team of his most trusted fighters and set out to ambush the train. As the train approached, Szabrinski's team sprang into action, opening fire on the Nazis and detonating the explosives they had planted on the tracks. But just as the train ground to a halt, a swarm of German soldiers appeared. Szabrinski knew that he was up against virtually the entire German battalion in the area, and the only way to defeat them was to employ a strategic, unconventional style of warfare, something which we know today as guerrilla warfare, and it was this hit-and-run approach that was incredibly effective. In the midst of the chaos, Szabrinski saw a glimmer of hope. He noticed that the Nazis had left their vehicles unguarded, and he knew that if he could steal one, he and his team might just be able to escape. With bullets whizzing past his head, Szabrinski sprinted towards the Nazi vehicles. He reached the closest one and dived into the driver's seat, gunning the engine and tearing off into the distance with his team in tow. As they drove through the countryside, Szabrinski knew that the Nazis would be hot on their heels, but he also knew that he had struck a serious blow against the enemy, and that he had proven that even in the darkest of times, hope could still triumph over despair.
Can you tell us about some of the actions taken by the partisans to disrupt the Nazis' operations?
The partisans were like a knife in the Germans' back. We blew up their trains, but by day they also received their just rewards. The partisans cut dozens of telephone and telegraph wires. We closed the main highways. We burned their bridges.
We were interested in getting involved in sabotage acts to interrupt and disrupt the communication and transportation to the front.
We attacked the depot. We were hitting out and got ammunition, and we blew up the train depot. We could see the Germans there, and I could recognize the Germans that I wanted to kill, who killed my friend. And they started to shoot towards us, but when they shot all only from revolvers. They were not prepared, they didn't have rifles, they didn't have machine guns. We overpowered them, so little by little their shooting started.
We had to blow up a train, and it was sitting in the background and waiting till the train approached, and some of the Germans got killed.
It's the same to Jews as it is to Americans to study the Revolutionary War and its heroes, right? People put their chest in front of English muskets to build a country. We put our chest in front of German muskets to defend ourselves from annihilation and maybe prevent the death of other Jews.
Amidst the darkness of World War II, a group of brave Jewish partisans emerged, challenging the Nazi regime with relentless determination. From secret forest hideouts, they waged acts of sabotage, crippling the enemy's war machine. Their stories of heroism, collaboration, and liberation must be told, for they embody the triumph of the human spirit and the crucial role they played in defeating the Nazis. These were the fighters who, through their actions, imprinted their mark in the pages of history. These were the warriors known as the Jewish Partisans.